it looks like the walls have been built up and reinforced.
Right, they may have been filled in. This may have been more open during the time of David.
Oh, surely to fit all those people.
That's right.
David's time here at the Cave of Adullam was very short, and only a couple of verses in 1 Samuel 22 that mention that. Even though it's mentioned so briefly, obviously it makes sense why he came here. Look at how much this opens up in here.
This is huge.
Oh, there's a bat flying around over there. And another tunnel leading out. There are little nooks and crannies all over the place. There's a place for a millstone, a small millstone.
Hey, look over here. Look over here.
Wow. It looks like an entrance.
How deep does it go?
It looks like the wall used to continue around. Maybe it's been backfilled. But the cave continues on the other side.
There's just room after room.
Oh, man. Look at this.
Oh, my.
It was surreal to think about this being the spot where David hid out, and to wonder which of these entrances was the one that he used every day. Which of these places was the place where he slept? And to think about this cavern being filled up with the people that had come to him, with the soldiers, his mighty men. Could 400 people really have met up with David and hid out here? Once you got into the cave system, it could easily house as many people as the text says that came and united with David here. It felt like we had gone through a time warp back to that day, and you might see David walking around at any moment. After David left Adullam and hid his parents in Moab, he kept moving around.
That's right. We are on the edge of the Judean wilderness. This part of the country only gets about 4 to 5 inches of rain per year. So it had been very important for David and his men to find water, which is why they came here to the streams of En-Gedi.
I would never imagine being in a place so arid as the Judean wilderness and then seeing a waterfall with a stream like this gurgling through.
It's a beautiful place, and of course you can see even here in the middle of the summer, water still comes through here. Take a look at this place. This is very similar to the caves of Adullam in the fact that it's remote. In addition to that, he had a layer of protection here. He would have been able to see when people were coming. The most important thing, of course, is the water. As you walk around this area, you can see for miles, this is the only place where water is. And so water continually funnels through the wilderness of Judea into this narrow valley that comes through En-Gedi. During the rainy times of the year, the water can be actually much higher than we are right now. In fact, you can see some of the markings and stuff on the wall where the water has been up that high during the wet season.
Again, Barry has taken us to a place that the Bible describes David going to during Saul's pursuit of him, and it's not some random place. It makes sense that he went there, and it makes sense why he went there. It's a real place, and you can walk up that canyon yourself. It was at En Gedi that Saul heard David was there. He brings his troops down, and he needs to take care of some business. Goes into a cave. It just happens to be the cave where David and his men are hiding. He had the peer pressure of his soldiers saying, God has given you a moment. God has provided an opportunity for you to eliminate the opposition. And David goes as far as to cut the king's robe, just the corner of it. And then guilt overcomes him, and he goes out after Saul leaves the cave to let him know, look, your life was in my hands. I could have removed you if I wanted to. For 10 years, David was on the run, trying to keep from being killed by Saul. And it would have been so tempting to cut all of that short by eliminating him in that cave.
He knew this was his opportunity to get back at Saul. But I appreciate David's attitude in the whole thing. Through all of this, he recognized that Saul was the king. He was the king chosen by God. David was a man after God's own heart. He had honor for the king, even though he was in the situation that he was in. And that's where the video ends for this evening. Okay, we want to talk about this a little bit, and we want to talk about what David was going through during this time. I do want to show a couple of pictures here. Well, let's look at let's look at this real quick. In 1 Samuel 24, that's where we want to start tonight, because this is the portion where he is at En Gedi. We referenced this in the video, but I want to talk about this a little bit more. In verse 1, it says, when Saul returned from following the Philistines, he was told, behold, David is in the wilderness of En Gedi. So David had gone here to En Gedi. By the way, does anybody know what En Gedi means, actually? It's a Hebrew word. Anytime you see the word En, E-N, or E-I-N, it stands for spring. And so this is actually the spring of wild goats here at En Gedi. And when you're there, you see wild goats. You saw a couple of those there, but you'll see wild goats all over the place. You actually see, as you're walking through En Gedi, you actually see a lot of animals. It's a good place to see animals, and of course it's because, obviously, there's water there. Whenever we tour this place, I usually make the point, we're stopping here because I want you to see there's water here. And it's an incredibly simple point, but it really is important to understand. I want to show a couple pictures. This picture is taken from Masada. We talked about Masada in our last class, about this stronghold that's down here near the Dead Sea. You can see actually the Dead Sea right here with the mountains of Moab over here to the right. But I'm showing you this picture because this one little tiny green area right here, you can probably better see it. Only see it if you're up close here. That is En Gedi. You can see there is no water anywhere around that's drinkable. That's drinkable, except for this tiny little oasis right there. And so that's how important this little area is. Here's actually my good friend Google Maps. I snapped this picture last night and put it in here because what you see here is the entire area. You can see, of course, the whole wilderness of Judea, and you can see the mountains of the hill country. Here are the hills of Moab, and of course the Dead Sea right here. The Dead Sea is actually beautiful. I mean, if you've seen the picture in that last picture, the water is crystal clear blue. It's beautiful water. You just can't drink it. But in this whole picture, what you have right here is this tiny, is that little green area? That little green area right there, that's En Gedi. And that's the only place in this entire area where there is water. And so it's very important. That's why David went here, was because he could get water. Here's actually a close-up of that same area, and you can see the green. There's basically two valleys that run into this area of En Gedi. This one is Wadi David, obviously named after David. This little valley that comes in from the wilderness of Judea, the water flows through here, and then there's Wadi Aragad right here. This the video clip that you just saw, we shot actually right in this area of the wadi right there. Usually when I stop with a tour group, we stop and park at that parking lot right there, and then we walk down through here. We actually came and shot the video over here because we knew that we could avoid the crowds. But you see these little green areas. They take the water that comes in here, and of course all this is the Dead Sea. A lot of water here, but none of it is usable for anything. But you can see where they have taken the water that they've used and they're using it for irrigation. This actually is a kibbutz, K-I-T-T-U-B-Z. A kibbutz is basically, I'll describe it as a religious community, Jewish religious community. Without getting to all the details, it's kind of like socialism that works on a very micro scale because it's a shared community. There's a number of them, I mean probably hundreds, 100 or so in Israel. But it's a community of Jewish people who work and educate their kids and raise their kids, and everybody that earns money, the money goes back into the pot of the community. And so it's not totally successful, but they've had them there for hundreds of years. And so, but this is the kibbutz that's near En Gedi. And of course, you can see that they use part of this land over here for crops. They've got it divided up there. And so anyway, but this is, this is the only area through here where you have water. And so that's why David came here. So if we look back at the passage, I want to read through this because there are some interesting things here. Let's look at the first 7 verses. It said, "Behold, David is in the wilderness of En Gedi. Then Saul took 3,000 chosen men, 3,000 chosen men out of all of Israel, and went to seek David and his men in front of the wild goat rocks." Again, there's the wild goats, the Gedi part of En Gedi. "And he came to the sheepfolds by the way, where there was a cave, and Saul went in to relieve himself. Now David and his men were sitting in the innermost parts of the cave, and the men of David said to him, 'Here is the day of which the Lord said to you, Behold, I will give your enemy into your hand, and you shall do to him as it shall seem good to you.' Then David arose and stealthily cut off the corner of Saul's robe. And afterward David's heart struck him because he had cut off the corner of Saul's robe. He said to his men, 'The Lord forbid me that I should do this thing to my Lord, the Lord's anointed, to put out my hand against him, seeing he is the Lord's anointed.' So David persuaded his men with these words and did not permit them to attack Saul. Saul rose up and left the cave and went on his way." So they're in this cave, and it just happens to be the same cave that Saul decides to go in, quite frankly, use the restroom. And so what do his men ask him to do? Kill him. Take advantage of the situation. And what was their justification for that? That's right. You've been told there's going to be a day come in which you're going to have this opportunity. This is the day. This is the day. And of course, David doesn't do that initially. He actually, what does he do? He cuts off part of the robe and has that. And then David, feels bad about it. And why is that? I love David's words here. Why does he feel bad about this? Yeah, I think that's it exactly. I mean, he uses the phrase twice in the sense, this is the Lord's anointed. This is the person who God has anointed and wants them to lead our people. And what am I doing? What am I doing? And so he feels sorry about that. Let's keep reading now, starting in verse 8. It says, "Afterward, David also arose and went out of the cave and called after Saul, 'My Lord, the king.' And when Saul looked behind him, David bowed his face to the earth and paid homage. And David said to Saul, 'Why do you listen to the words of men who say, Behold, David seeks you harm? Behold, this day your eyes have seen how the Lord gave you today into my hand in the cave. And some told me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, I will not put out my hand against the Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed.' See, my father, see the corner of the robe in my hand? For by the fact that I cut off the corner of your robe and did not kill you, you may know and see that there is no wrong or treason in my hands. I have not sinned against you, though you hunt my life to take it. May the Lord judge between me and you. May the Lord avenge me against you, but my hand shall not be against you. As the Proverbs of the ancient says, out of the wicked comes wickedness, but my hand shall not be against you. After whom has the king of Israel come out? After whom do you pursue? After a dead dog, after a flea. May the Lord therefore be judge and give sentence between me and you, and see to it and plead my cause and deliver me from your hand. And as soon as David had finished speaking these words to Saul, Saul said, Is that your voice, my son David? Saul lifted up his voice and wept. He said to David, You are more righteous than I, for you have repaid me good, whereas I have repaid you evil. And you have declared this day how you have dealt with me, and that you did not kill me when the Lord put me into your hands. For if a man finds his enemy, will he let him go away safe? So may the Lord reward you with good for what you have done to me this day. And now, behold, I know that you shall surely be king, and the kingdom of Israel shall be established in your hand. Swear to me, therefore, by the Lord, that you will not cut off my offspring after me, and that you will not destroy my name out of my father's house. And David swore this to Saul. Saul went home, but David and his men went up to the stronghold. Okay, let's talk about this a little bit. This has happened, and so David spared Saul's life, and so they go outside the cave, and what does David do? Yeah, he calls out to him and begins to tell him exactly what has just happened. And so when he details all of this, what was the basics of what David said to Saul? I don't have this question up here, but I could have killed you, but I didn't. Doug? Yeah, that's right. If you couldn't hear him, he says most people would have gone haughtily and that bragged about what they did, but that's not David's approach to Saul. David went out humbly, bowing himself to Saul. And so, yeah, he says, I could have done this. And in fact, I was encouraged by my men to do this. But I didn't, it wasn't appropriate. I didn't want to do this. Well, Saul, how does Saul react to this? He wept. Yeah. He was humbled. Yes. How does Saul refer to David? Calls him my son. And is that, obviously he wasn't his biological son, but can you expect, given their history, you can see there is a close relationship between these two people. Despite, what's going on, there has been a really close relationship between them. And so Saul is talking about this with David. And, how else does he feel? That's right. He does. He says, I know this has happened, and God allowed this to happen. You had the opportunity, but you didn't do it. And what does Saul say about David's future? He knew at this point, you are the one. You will be king. You're going to be king of Israel. And just that acknowledgement, what does that mean to Saul? Okay, Saul's not going to be king, but also who else is not going to be king? Yeah, Saul's son. That's admitting that Jonathan has no chance of being king because you're going to be king. And it's interesting too, what is the one request that Saul makes of David? Yeah, don't cut off my offspring. And why would he say that? Yeah, that was the general practice. Anytime that there was I'll say a change of administration, if a new king came in and it wasn't the child of the previous king, then that was a kind of a common occurrence. Take out all of your enemies. And so that was his one request. Now, what's interesting about that request? What do we know? I'm not sure how much Saul knew, but what do we know about the relationship between David and Saul's offspring? Yeah, it was very, very strong. I mean, I'm not there with David, but I can't imagine that David ever would have done anything to Saul's offspring, even if he hadn't have requested it. Daryl?
It's kind of interesting because it depends on which offspring you're talking about.
Yeah,
But it
yeah.
is associated with Jonathan.
Yeah.
Certainly was protected and everything, but when he had to surrender some of Saul's sons
Yeah.
to avenge him for some wrong that Saul had done, it didn't sound like he was too terribly concerned.
Yeah, yeah. Later on we come to that event. You're right. You're right. Okay, see what I have. Oh, yeah. What did Saul ask of David? And that's what I mentioned right here, was the fact that he said, don't cut off my offspring from this. And then yeah, I have the question on here. Where did each of them go? I mean, at this point they decided to part. Where does it say they went? In the very last verse here. Saul went home. It says David went up to the stronghold. I do think in this verse it actually is referring to Masada, as we talked about, just because of the general location of where En-Gedi is. I mean, you could see it from that picture a minute ago, that you could see En-Gedi from there. And what else in this verse? There's one single verse that word that kind of makes me think that too. Went up, yeah. Obviously, the top of that is about 1,000 feet. Actually, the top of that is very close to sea level. It raises about 1,200 feet or so above the surface of where it is. So the top of Masada is almost at about sea level, but I think that's probably where he went. Okay, now what's interesting about this is that you can see the humbleness, the humility of Saul here, and it seems like all is good. However, we then flip over to the 26th chapter. And we have yet another story of guess what Saul's doing? Verse 1, then the Ziphites came to Saul at Gibeah, saying, is not David hiding himself in the hill of Hachilah, which is on the east of Jesimon? And Saul arose and went down to the wilderness of Ziph with 3,000 chosen men. I don't know if it's the same guys or not, but to seek David in the wilderness of Ziph. So whatever he said at the end of chapter 24, Saul has now forgotten. Or he's chosen to forget it, choosing to ignore it, but now he's after David once more. And so we won't read this entire story here, but hopefully maybe you've looked at what's the general story here. Saul and his men go out looking for David, and David's men hear that Saul is close, and what do they do when David goes and looks at them? They go and spy out on Saul's men, and what do they find? Verse 4, David sent out spies. They came to the place where Saul encamped, and Saul himself was lying there in the encampment. And the encampment was all around. So that's what he found. He found Saul is actually there. So when he finds that, they decide to come up with a plan. And what was the plan? Yep, sneak into the camp. Let's go in there at night. Let's take care of this. And so when they get down there, what did Saul's men want him to do? I mean, what did David's men want David to do? Verse 8, then Abishai said to David, God has given your enemy into your hand this day. Here we go again. Now please let me pin him to the earth with one stroke of the spear, and I will not strike him twice. Meaning, if you let's do this. Because it says in verse 7, back up one verse, says, David and Abishai went to the army by night, and there lay Saul sleeping within the encampment with his spear stuck in the ground at his head, and Abner and the army lay around him. So Saul's spear is stuck right in the ground, right next to where he's sleeping, And you know, they say to David, let's take the spear, let's put it through him right here, pin him to the ground. And then what's David's reaction? Same as it was before. Look at the next verse, verse 9. David said to Abishai, do not destroy him. For who can put out his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? Again, recognizing who Saul was. Despite everything that's going on, he recognizes who Saul is and that he is the Lord's anointed. There?
It's actually also a bit of a foreshadow to Jesus
Mm.
in the same statement.
Yeah.
Think about it, every time that he's talking about the Lord's anointed, and realize that that's also a praise for Jesus.
Yeah.
And then think about the implications. Who can raise a hand against Jesus and not be guilty?
Yeah.
It's kind of
Very interesting point. Yeah, very interesting. And so what do they end up doing? Whoops, back up. What do they end up doing? That's right. They end up taking the spear, and they take a jug of water that's sitting there as well, and they leave. Verse 12, David took the spear, the jar of water from Saul's head, and they went away. No man saw it or knew it, nor did they awake, for they were all asleep, because a deep sleep from the Lord had fallen on them. So they got into the camp, took these things, and left. So, just like what had happened in En-Gedi, what does David do? David goes out to a little hill that's just outside the camp, and what does he do? Yeah, he hollers down there. He hollers down there in the middle of it. Verse 13, he called out to the army, called out to Abner, who was the commander of Saul's army. And then Abner answered, who are you who calls out to the king? And David said to Abner, are you not a man? Who is like you in Israel? Why then have you not kept watch over your lord the king? What's David accusing him of? Yeah, failing to do his job. Failing to do his job. Abner had one job, and that's to protect the king. And he's not doing that. And David, I mean, maybe he's being a little spiteful here, but as a citizen of the kingdom, he's upset that the commander's not doing a good job of protecting him. And so he talks about that. And then what happens? Saul wakes up. And what is Saul's immediate reaction again? Yeah, he heard David's voice again. He recognized David's voice, verse 17. And again, what does he refer to him as? My son. Is that your voice, my son David? And David said, it is my voice, my Lord, O King. There's an admiration here despite what's going on. That's amazing. And it's interesting what, I do want to read this. Let's read what David says here. He says, why does my Lord pursue after his servant? For what have I done? What evil is on my hands? Now therefore, let my Lord the king hear the words of his servant. If it is the Lord who has stirred you up against me, may he accept an offering. But if it is men, may they be cursed before the Lord, for they have driven me out this day, that I should have no share of the heritage of the Lord, saying, go and serve other gods. Now therefore, let not my blood fall to the earth away from the presence of the Lord, for the king of Israel has come out to seek a single flea like me, who hunts a partridge in the mountains. He says, who put you up this? Did God put you up this, or did men put you up this? Why are you wasting your time chasing after me? I'm nothing. Let's connect the dots here. What started all this? What? I'll get you, Cliff, just say, what started all this? Look at it. Which was one of the jobs the people had asked him to do. David did this, and of course afterwards David got praise, more praise than Saul did, and that just kind of set him off. Yes, sir, Cliff.
How much time was there between the first time and the one day now?
I don't know the answer to this. Does anybody else know? I thought about that too as I was studying through this.
less than 13 years.
Yeah, I think there probably was a period of time. It wasn't, the next week or something. I think there was a period of time, but I wasn't really sure. Doug?
I agree. You know, he's spent 10 years in the wilderness.
Yeah.
So there was some time in between. You gotta remember that Saul was sitting in a distressing spirit too.
Yeah.
So
He is struggling.
he has moments of
Yeah.
clarity, and then all of a sudden he wigs out again.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Well, and we see him kind of coming back together here. Let's look at verse 21. Then Saul said, I have sinned. Return, my son David, for I will no more do you harm, because my life was precious in your eyes this day. Behold, I have acted foolishly and have made a great mistake. David answered and said, Here is the spear, O king. Let one of the young men come over and take it. The Lord rewards every man for his righteousness and his faithfulness. For the Lord gave you into my hand today, and I would not put out my hand against the Lord's anointed. Behold, as your life was precious this day in my sight, so may my life be precious in the sight of the Lord, and may he deliver me out of all tribulation. Then Saul said to David, Blessed be you, my son David. You will do many things and will succeed in them. So David went away, and Saul returned to his place. What does Saul, admit here? First of all, he's wrong. We've been doing this for 10 years. I'm wrong. I should not have been doing this. I have sinned. I should not have been doing this. And he says this. David gives the sword back. And what was Saul's final conclusion about David? He will be king, and what else? You're going to succeed. And whatever you do, you will succeed. And then it says they went on to their own place. Now, if on Sunday, we're going to be looking at the next 3 or 4 chapters. But do we see Saul and David together again? We don't. This may very well have been the incident that actually ended this between the two. We have a few more chapters with Saul, and we're going to discuss those on Sunday. But this was how it all ended. Doug?
Here's another incident when we talk about David. He didn't believe Saul. Because in the very next verse,
Yeah.
27 verse 1, he heads out listening because he knows that Saul's going to come after him.
That's right. And despite what Saul said here, why does David think that?
Ask practice.
Yeah. He has learned. He's a smart guy. He has learned from past experiences. Russell?
Barry, I like to read about David's mighty men.
Yeah.
In 2 Samuel chapter 23.
Yeah.
And one of the men mentioned was this Abishai.
Yeah.
He was with David and they snuck him. He said, let me have that spear and I'll pin Saul to the ground.
Yeah.
We were told in chapter 23 of 2 Samuel that Abishai with his spear killed 300 men.
That's verse 18, yeah.
These were like the Navy SEALs and that.
Yeah, maybe so. Yeah.
His men that were with him, they were very skilled.
Yeah, they were. They were. Absolutely. Okay, any other comments or questions tonight? Yeah, Darren's point is that David asked an interesting question here. Have you been listening to God or have you been listening to man? And it seems that throughout Saul's reign, he really didn't listen to God the way he should have, because I think his reign would have been very different. I mean, where was the first time Do you remember back a couple weeks ago when we studied about when Saul began, when they got ready to formally announce Saul to the people, where was he? Yeah, he was just hiding in the luggage, you know, so this is not the guy that, you know, you want. And as we see through these chapters, Saul just never lived up to his potential and what people expected of him. And I don't want to get too far in because on Sunday we're going to talk about Saul's death, but that's kind of the way it went.
The only thing Saul won was the Mr. American contest.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, that's right. Sherry?
That he was overcome with jealousy
Yes. Overcome with jealousy.
and went back.
And it's sending him down the wrong path. That's right. Real quick, the lesson I have for today is that, you know, God always provides a way of escape for his people. We talk about that verse from the New Testament where it talks about temptation. But these, you know, what we read in these chapters are perfect examples of that. David was in a pickle a number of times, but God always provided a way for him to escape, as he will for us in whatever we're doing. Okay. Appreciate everybody's comments tonight. For Sunday morning, read the last 27 through 31, the last few chapters of 1 Samuel, and look through Lesson 7, and we'll be discussing the Saul's final days.
Just a couple of quick announcements. Scott and Paula are out of town. So's Craig still, and Jim Witt is still, he's up in Chicago now, going back to El Paso Friday, I think he said. So remember them. Belinda's surgery apparently was successful. They had her up walking, I guess, last night. I got a text from Larry, and I think he'd sent out an email. So continue to remember her in your prayers. As we've mentioned, Dot Newman, her news wasn't what she really wanted to hear. She's got to wait a little while to see if they can do something, because the only treatment for her cancer is the chemo, and she's got an allergic reaction to it, unless they can do it real slow, is what she told me the other day. You have anything else? Great to see Darren out tonight. Let's encourage him not to go too fast, but glad he's improving. Any other sick that anybody's aware of?
I'm going to send out a note about Ed.
Okay, Brother Ed Brand, who has preached in Alabama for years and years, went to Kenya and has had some gallbladder problems and is in the hospital over there. Jamie?
It was also mentioned to me that many of us worship down the road in Mark Dean. He's been battling cancer for a number of years. He passed away.
Who was that?
Mark
Mark Dean? Okay. Also, from East Side, Brother Fred Richter's wife passed away. Her brother also has recently passed away. He went home from the hospital yesterday, so they've had quite a bout, so you might keep the Richter family in your prayers as well. I think Tony's the son that I've been seeing some of the posts from. So James Craig was her brother. Yeah, Brother James Craig and Sister Richter, brother and sister, both passed within, I think, 3 or 4 days of each other. He'd had some problems, and Brother Fred Richter was in the hospital, went home, ended up with COVID, went back to the hospital, now he's back home. So they've had quite a bout with it. There's others that are too. We need to keep our leaders in our prayers and everything else. Let's close with a quick prayer. Our dear God, there are so many things that are on our minds and our hearts. We thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight, to be encouraged by looking at your word and how David had, being a man after God's own heart, acted. Help us to act like him in the things that he did that were good, Father. Help us to have faith. Help us to realize that you're in control no matter what happens in this country. Help us, Father, to be able to worship you in freedom, be with Brother Brand. all the others that are sick, those that are in the hospital, Father. Guide us and help us to be here to worship you on the Lord's Day. It's in the name of your Son, our Savior, that we come before you. Amen.
And you know, he goes from, he's sparing Saul's life in the previous chapter. And then he gets disrespected.
Yeah, yes.
By Nabal.